this morning. Good morning. It's nice to see everyone this morning. I had a little technical glitch there again. For some reason, the phone sideways was working before, but now we're back up to upright. So good morning. We're here on Facebook Live with Family Caregivers of BC, and we're delighted that you're here with us this morning. So what we're hoping to do with these particular Facebook Lives is to bring a place for us to come and connect, to give some insight and education for family caregivers during this time of physical distancing and change. So one thing that we're certainly learning as a team is that this is a real shared experience for all of us. And we're learning from you, our users, and our information. We're receiving lots of ongoing updates and stories around how caregiving is impacting us as a province, in our cities, in our towns, and within our families. So one thing we just like to go over each session around Facebook Live is just talking a bit about how we can make sure you know how to connect with us and how we can support with you. So if you're an active user on Facebook, please make sure you send your questions, your ideas, and your concerns through Messenger, and we'll make sure to monitor the inbox on a regular basis to direct you to a resource and provide support. Family Caregivers of BC, we certainly take your confidentiality and privacy very seriously. This live session, though, is open to anyone using Facebook, and so we just aren't able to take any steps to monitor the inbox on a regular basis to please stop. We aren't able to take any steps to protect your privacy or the content that you're sharing. Be aware that experiences and the information expressed are meant to speak to caregivers on a general level and may not reflect your own personal experiences or values. And we certainly encourage you to check our website regularly to sign up for our newsletter and social media feeds as we try to provide regular updates on recommendations from public health guidelines and supportive resources. So today we thought, in light of what's happened the last week within our organization and attending a webinar, we'd like to touch on managing caregiver expectations. And before I begin, one of the things that I really want to touch on is this idea that part of our reasons for doing Facebook Lives is to share ideas, to share strategies, to perhaps at some level sometimes take the emotion away from caregiving and focus on trying to find solutions. That's just one aspect. It's not lost on any of us, the emotional impact caregiving has on a regular day-to-day, never mind through a different set of times. And this morning, as I was doing a bit of extra research around managing expectations and just reviewing some of my notes, and I came across a couple of stories from my Facebook feed from friends back in Ontario. And about 6 or 7 of my friends are dealing with an aging grandparent in long-term care around the whole experience around COVID. A couple of them, their grandparents have died as a result of the coronavirus and the impact of that. And that's not lost on us at Family Caregivers of BC, and certainly not me on a personal level. And also just to say that I'm very aware that currently I'm not a caregiver. And so it can be easy for me to be up here talking about different practical strategies, but I'm not living through it right now. And so that's where your stories and your experiences and what the messages that you're sending to us is so vitally important. And so we want to thank you for sharing your stories with us and for giving us further light into the everyday experiences that you're facing. So with that, one thing we wanted to touch on today was managing caregiver expectations. And yesterday we had the chance to participate in a webinar hosted by the Canadian Foundation for Healthcare Improvement. And the focus was on family and caregiver presence and partnership during the COVID-19 pandemic. And in the last week, we've also been experiencing a number of caregivers calling with concerns related to challenges such as reduction in formal services, worry and anxiety about getting tests done, blood work done, and changing other expectations in other parts of their life. And so we wanted to touch on this idea of what's the current messaging that we're hearing as nonprofit organizations and with healthcare professionals, and also this idea of that how do we temper that in this current situation? How do we temper caregiving and our own personal expectations? So first of all, one of the messages that came out loud and clear yesterday in this webinar is that these are unprecedented times for the healthcare system, and it's a constant pivot as more data comes in around COVID-19, the impact of physical distancing, and the timing of these changing policies. However, this sort of global message around this idea of what does essential services mean was also a big part of the conversation, and how it's being mandated by various levels of government, and how it affects all of healthcare and social services. And so this idea that the longer this period goes on, the harder it's going to be to maintain current level services. This is the kind of the key message that we've all been hearing as a society. But as a result, what's happening now is we're starting to see some of those cracks. And so individuals that were normally receiving a certain amount of services are now having a reduction in services. And so caregivers are now being asked to do more. So in the past, they may not have bathed an aging parent or a spouse, or they may not have been able to, or they may not have had to be in contact with someone else that they've been caring for on a regular basis because of those other formal services or other informal services that were available. And so that's changed significantly of late. And then the other piece that we're also hearing, of course, is that there's lots of increase in wait times for calls to be returned, for services to be altered, or to even have a conversation with someone within the health authority or a specialist around ongoing treatment or changes to that treatment. One thing that they did touch on, of course, the focus was about the whole healthcare system. So it obviously talked about all populations. So, if there was adult children that were at risk, or young children at risk, or if it were palliative end of life, that there was this ability for family caregivers to be present and provide care, and that the systems had processes in place to accommodate that. One thing that also really struck me in this conversation around the webinar were the healthcare professionals and their voice, and their message is also that it's been quite stressful for them not to be able to feel like they're doing enough for the people under their care or the people that are using their services, and that they're also equally affected. They're doing the best they can. That came out loud and clear as well through that webinar. So I thought just globally it's nice to know where those pieces are at. The other thing that really came out were some of the voices of caregivers in this webinar. And in particular right now in Ontario and Quebec, we've had our fair share of trauma in BC, especially in long-term care facilities. But in Ontario and Quebec right now, they're also experiencing some major changes, even in some of the federal prison systems. This idea that there's this movement that's gaining momentum and awareness, and it's this concept that family caregivers are an essential part of the care team. And so I think one thing we wanted to ensure that people knew is that there is that collective voice that is present, and that is aware, and that is writing about this idea. There's a hashtag called not just a visitor. That family caregivers are an critical part of the care team. So just that message of hope, and that message of knowing that all across Canada, individuals in the healthcare field and family caregivers and individuals like us, the nonprofit organization, we are really focusing on the fact that family caregivers are part of that care team, especially during a difficult time like this, and trying to find ways to work within those existing policies that honor and protect the individual providing care, but also the individuals that are informal caregivers. So this idea of managing expectations, we have touched on this before in some of our previous webinars. And so one of the things that tends to happen is with these changes in services and accesses, what we're seeing and hearing is that caregivers, their families, and the person they're caring for, they're experiencing these changes in expectations. So things were operating a certain way, now things are not, and so there's this change in expectations. So the services and the support that we expect from those in our formal and informal circles may no longer be possible, or they are simply not capable of either handling them or doing them. So therefore, we're in this position where we have to shift our outcome, or shift thinking about what our outcomes can be, that can help manage or help realign ourselves to this new sense of normal. And one of the things that we use a fair amount in our coaching is this idea that we have, what's a worst case scenario and a best case scenario. And so obviously your best case scenario is up here and your worst case scenario is here. And it's good to actually take a look at that range. And then the one question we like to ask family caregivers is, well, what's reasonable, or what can you live with? And that might be here. It doesn't mean that we're still not going for best case scenario, but that we have a point that we understand, okay, this is what I can live with. This is something that's acceptable. And it's this idea of shifting our perspective on what success looks like for us as a caregiver here and now. Doesn't mean it's not going to change. Doesn't mean that we can't continually evolve. It's just that we're in a position right now where we're a bit more forced to. And so sometimes that shift in perspective, how do we redefine success in caregiving? How do we redefine success in self-care? And also with that care recipient, also understanding that they're also adjusting to this change as well, even maybe if they can't articulate it, or they're not fully aware of the impact it's having on caregivers themselves, that they themselves are also experiencing a shift in expectations because their routines have been adapted. So that whole idea of just awareness, of understanding, managing those expectations and thinking about that range of what's acceptable, what can we live with, is a tool that we often, or a strategy that we often use with family caregivers. The other thing that I think is also really important is this idea that just because you may not think it's an essential service or conversation, it doesn't mean that you don't reach out for help. So we've had caregivers calling saying, well, I'm not sure if I should call my case manager. I'm not sure if I should call my doctor. I don't know how essential it is. So there's a lot of value, for example, in reaching out to an organization such as ours, or another organization, disease specific, or a friend or a family, to get a different perspective to say, if I were in your shoes, I'd still reach out, because it does sound, that it merits a conversation. It may take a while to get that response back, or the response you might get back may be not the action you think is deserved or warranted, but that sometimes that whole process can help put things into perspective around understanding, okay, you feel validated in your concern. Or conversely, when you're speaking to someone, you work through the process, you realize that, oh, well, maybe I've actually got a few things in my toolbox that I hadn't thought of for this situation that I can apply. So sometimes it may not be easy to invent a new solution on our own. So even having a conversation to process, especially for some people out loud or in a written format, or a brainstorm, is really helpful, even if it doesn't necessarily result in an immediate change. So I think that was a really important piece we also wanted to speak to today, was keep reaching out for support, and be patient, knowing that healthcare providers and other services are also experiencing their own, trying to figure out their own, managing their own expectations, but also reaching out to Family Caregivers of BC through whether it's email, our phone, through Messenger. We're more than happy to provide support in the best way that we can. So one thing I did want to speak to in case we didn't speak to this in the last couple of weeks is that we do have an updated page that we'll try and keep it updated as regular as possible, and that's our COVID-19 resource page. And so we'll make sure that link gets into the comment section of this live video. And then the other thing I wanted to bring to light, which I thought was a really nice resource, is just if anyone's looking to do a bit more reading around caregiving expectations and the personal transformation we experience, is there's a wonderful author, her name's Donna Thompson, and she dives into this whole idea of this journey that caregivers embark on, and the transformation within ourselves and within the person that we're caring for. And she also brings in some evidence-based information to complement her story and her writings. And so I just thought in light of talking about managing expectations, it looks like there's a great resource. She has a great blog as well. So we'll make sure that gets into the bottom notes as well. Just to remember that you want to call our support line. We're here 8:30 to 4 p.m. Monday to Friday. We can listen to you, we can brainstorm with you, we can support you, we can direct you to the best of our knowledge. We have an incredible team of individuals with a wide range of experience and backgrounds. The bulk of us at Family Caregivers of BC are currently caregivers. Some of us have been caregivers like myself, but currently not a caregiver. But all of us have had personal experience with caregiving. And so that allows us to at least understand your story in terms of from the caregiving experience. So we certainly encourage you to reach out to us in whatever capacity you feel is best for you. Also, last week we launched our podcast, which was really exciting, and we have another launch coming up next Tuesday. So we're super excited about that, and we hope you'll have a chance to tune into the podcast as well. And if you missed it last week, make sure to find it on our website. And at the end of today's session, I always like to take a moment to again thank you for joining us and thank you for watching, but also asking yourself what's one thing that you think you can do in this week to continue to support yourself as a caregiver and the person that you're caring for. So thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Bye for now.